Dr. Joe Collins is an extremely accomplished individual with a real passion for philanthropy, education, and leadership development. Joe has been a CEO and chairman in government, for-profit and not-for-profit sectors, including in gambling, universities, hospital and aged care organisations. He currently works in the finance and higher education sectors. Notable in relation to today's topic, Joe has chaired national and international foundations and was the founding chairman of 2 private philanthropic foundations, which have directly and indirectly funded innovative childhood cancer research programs worth around $100 million. Joe is a 2-time cancer survivor and has been a passionate advocate for children with cancer for most of his life. Today, you'll hear about some of Joe's experiences with the power of giving and the lessons he's learned along the way. Over to you, Joe.
Thanks very much, Joe. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for spending some time with Kath and Good to Give this afternoon at this symposium. The topic of today is about, how giving has the power to change the world. My objective is after the next half an hour, you're all going to believe that in your heart of hearts. So that's objective number 1. Number 2 objective is that I'd love you to realise that it's not somebody else's job to change the world. It's your job. And you all, number 3 objective is I want to help you understand that you all have that power. It's not beyond you, it's within you. So what I've done today is try and craft a logical walkthrough of an agenda, which you can see there. I'm going to talk about purpose, but more importantly, I'm going to talk about the why. I'll talk about my why. I'm going to share with you how I came to my why. I'm going to talk about how to focus on giving and the most important thing in philanthropy, which is about relationships. And I'll talk about what, and I'll sum it all up at the end with some lessons learned. So let's start with purpose. For those of you who have watched TED Talks, you'll recognize the golden circle as something Simon Sinek talks about. And if you haven't watched this before, please do. Please do. It's a really simple way of conceiving what's really important for yourself and for organisations that you might be associated with. And certainly it will help you understand what's important for other people. So the why is really all, the single purpose, the cause, the belief that is so important to you in your life, and how is the actions that you're going to take, and what is everything tangible that you see in an organisation. And what I'd say about this is the more you understand your purpose in life, the more you'll follow that purpose. And for those who are not working in a field or a space where you're able to fulfill your purpose, you're going to be unhappy. You really need to get into a space in your life where you can fulfill your purpose. Otherwise, there is no purpose. The last thing I'll say about this is going back to Simon. Simon's written a book called Find Your Why, and it's a how-to. So for those who think this might be too hard, go and have a look at that book. It steps you through how to go about finding your purpose. The second thing I want to talk about is if you're going to change the world, then the word change is pretty important. And Steve Jobs there is saying that, the ones who change the world are the crazy ones. And to an extent, I agree with that. But you don't have to be crazy. There's lots of people that have changed the world, the likes of current billionaires flying their spaceships to the moon. Many of them have changed parts of the world. But there's been other great people who have changed the world. Henry Ford, George Washington, Socrates, going back 400 to 400 BC, Buddha, Nelson Mandela. There's many, many people. And in the philanthropy world, Bill Gates, and close to home in Australia, you've got the likes of Twiggy now making significant contributions, John Kinghorn to mention them. But one thing I will say to you, there's no shortage of money. Money doesn't change the world. One organisation that I'm aware of that's basically a large family office here in Australia, they have almost 100 people that can give between $500,000 and $15 million per year, and they do. So money's not the real issue. It's about understanding that purpose. It's about understanding change, and change, there's lots of change models. I've been the CEO of a number of organisations, and over the years, I've dealt with complex change models. And at the end of the day, I just take it down to three simple things. It's about creating awareness for what the purpose is. It's about gaining acceptance for that purpose, and it's about taking action towards that purpose. So they're the three things that I'd ask you to really think about if you want to make changes in the world. Somebody who did make change, and it's a different philosophy than the great person theory of who can make change. And I probably am more aligned to Mother Teresa in the belief that you can't change it alone. You need to, if you want to change the world, you have to do it with people, and you have to bring people along with you. An analogy which is similar to the quote there from Mother Teresa about creating ripples is the chaos theory. And the one example that you've probably heard is about the butterfly flapping its wings in the Amazon, and that creating change in the weather systems of London and Europe and so forth. I love that sort of analogy, and that theory is not based on fairy tales. There is a mathematical formula behind chaos theory. And again, if you don't know about it, have a read about it. But yeah, Mother Teresa said a number of other things in her life, which is widely quoted on. One was that if you want to change the world, go home and love your family. So it starts with those around you, the ones that you have relationships with and the most influence on. And another thing that she said is, don't worry about what problems exist in the world, just respond to people's needs. And for those of you who are in the world of philanthropy, understanding people and understanding their needs and what needs to change is really important. And I've given you some hints over there on the left-hand side about how do you make those 3 A's possible, and it's about, giving with purpose, communications, focus, teamwork, relationships. And in regard to relationships, I'll talk about my purpose and one relationship I have. The woman there is my lifelong friend and partner. Her name is Glenda. We met in 1970, and that's a long, long time ago. And I remember two things, two big moments in our lives together that sort of helped me define my purpose. One was I was about 17. I just got my license. Glenda was younger. And we were talking about what we wanted to do when we left school. Glenda was very clear. She's always been had great clarity about what she'd do with her life. And she was able to rattle off what she wanted to do. When it came my turn, all I could say is, I don't know what I'm going to do in life, but I want it to be something important. And that's something that stayed with me. I can still picture the moment I said that and where I was in my car and exactly where I was at sort of lights over at Bexley in Sydney. So that was one moment. The second moment came, we were married on the 29th of November, and the second moment came on the 29th of November, 1 year later. I was diagnosed with a rare cancer and given 6 months to live. I was a 22-year-old young man and my wife was 20, and facing the prospects of 6 months to live. It certainly quickly changes your outlook on what's important and what's life is all about. What happened was the doctor said, you've got two choices. You can go home and die, prepare to die, or we can put you into what today would be called a clinical trials unit down in Sydney. We were living in Bathurst at the time. The second proposition sounded slightly more attractive to me, but I had no idea what a clinical trials unit was. But over the next 6 or close to 7 months, I certainly found out. They basically used me as a guinea pig. They took my spleen out. I had chemotherapy, radiotherapy, many other trials and tribulations along the way. They collapsed all my veins by taking so much blood. They took lots of bone marrow, getting ready for a bone marrow transplant, and it was a pretty horrible time. One of the highlights, again, which related to Glenda, she was her birthday, her 21st, and they'd just taken a big wedge of bone out of, basically chiseled it out of my hip bone because they couldn't take any more bone marrow from my spine. And what the doctor said, they operated, took that, and that was a Tuesday. Friday came along. I was hoping to see Glenda for her birthday. They told me I couldn't, so that made me very determined. I wasn't going to miss my wife's 21st birthday. So after asking a few questions of the nurses, I worked out how I was going to pull all the stuff out of my side, the catheter and so forth. And I did exactly that. Wandered up to Misselton Road and hailed a taxi. Very hard in a pair of shorty pajamas in Sydney to convince a taxi driver to take you on a journey to the outer suburbs. But I did, had a great weekend, came back into the hospital on Monday and got into all sorts of trouble. So that was another sort of highlight, but the real highlight and how it affected my purpose was at the end of that journey of 7 months, Glenda and I went on a holiday, not knowing whether I'd live for 6 months, the end of the holiday, 12 months, whatever. And my very clever wife during the next week asked me lots of questions about, what was I feeling? What did I learn? And I articulated after about a week that the two things I learned was what happened to me, I was a guinea pig and it was a terrible way to do medical research. I fortunately survived. Unlike the other 20 people of the 21 that went in there with me, there were 10 adults and 11 children. Everybody else died. So I was very fortunate. But the second thing I learned during that period is adults and children behave very differently in that space. And children were full of hope. They were absolutely inspirational, and that stayed with me for the rest of my life. And my clever wife said, well, you've learnt those two really important lessons. What are you going to do about it? So I'll share with you a little bit later what I tried to do about it. But before I do, I just want to go back to what I said earlier about relationships and how they matter in philanthropy. And I'll leave you to read the notes on the screen, but there's two things, human relationships are the fundamental denominator in building contribution, trust, altruism. In the world of philanthropy, if you can't build relationships, you're not going to survive. If you don't love people and enjoy developing those relationships, again, you're in the wrong space. To understand the two things that are really important, if you look at that diagram there, put yourself at the center of the diagram. The high interaction and high relatedness, which are the two things that are important in building relationships, it's really easy with family, friends, close friends, but people you have less to do with, where you might not have the same sort of connectedness or relatedness, same frequency of interactions, that you don't form the strong relationships with them. So in philanthropy, if you want to work at it and work really hard at building relationships, then you have to up the frequency and up the relatedness. And most importantly, it's got to be authentic. If you do not feel the relatedness and want to be with people, then that's going to shine through to those that you're talking to. So, I'd ask you all, in defining your own purpose and the way you're going to approach building relationships, please be authentic, because it won't work otherwise. What matters in forming relationships? Number of things, and there's 5 there: communications, respect, boundaries, trust, support. And I thought I'd give you an example from part of my career was involving universities. So I was asked to head up the philanthropic arm of a large university that was doing very poorly. They were only raising at the time $500,000 a year, and they were the worst performing university in Australia. What I told the people who had approached me is that it's not a fundraising job. They thought it was. The job was one of cultural change and influence. And so I took it on the basis that I would work out what the really important things were that the university was leaders in. I would work in building relationships with people who had a liking or an association with those things. And probably the best example was there was one organisation as part of the university. It was called the National Institute of Complementary Medicine. And we had one interested donor, or we had a number of interested donors, and it was quite attractive to a range of people. But one donor who'd been giving a little bit of money each year, I'd identified them as somebody a bit special and developed a good relationship with them. And this particular day, I was aware that this individual was going to donate a substantial amount of money, didn't know how much, to the head of NICM. And the head of NICM came along with me, and we sat in this chap's office. And basically, he said, I'll give you $2.5 million. And the head of the NICM was thrilled. And they both looked at me wanting praise and accolades. And I just looked at the donor and I said, you know what, that's not really nearly enough, and it's not going to achieve your objectives. And I fed back to that donor what I'd heard over the last year about what he wanted to achieve and why and so forth. And he said to me, well, how much, will it take? And I said 30. And what I said to him is, you give 10, I'll find another 10, and we'll get 10 from a third person. And literally within a couple of weeks, we did exactly that. But it was as a result of all of those things about building respect, understanding boundaries, forming trust and support with that donor that we were able to achieve that outcome. This little diagram here is something I joined the Children's Cancer Institute in 2002. I became the chairman in 2003, and at that time we had 60 or 70 scientists. We were raising a few $1 million through research grants, and about the same in funding from the government and so forth. And it was a really great organisation, but I think many of the people in the organisation felt they were B graders, and I didn't want to be a B grader. So I said, we're going to build a $100 million new research centre. We're going to have 500 scientists in the next 5 years. And everyone thought I was mad. It goes back to what our friends at Apple said, but I wasn't mad, but I knew how to build relationships and I knew how to work with people. And in 2009, we finished this building. We didn't raise $100 million. We only raised 45, but I convinced the head of the University of New South Wales, to put in the rest. And we built that organisation, and it's become an outstanding organisation that's gone on to bigger and better things. So really happy about that. In terms of giving, I've got there, it's about leadership. It's about listening and sharing hope. And you'll see a picture there of a whole bunch of kids. What I learned in dealing with children for many, many years was that a firm belief that I had that every child deserves a chance at a healthy life. Not one or two of them, not 3 or 4 of them, but every single child. And that my job was to try and do something about giving every child a chance at a healthy life. And I'm going to mention in a moment little stories about 2 of those children on the screen there. One is the boy who's standing up in his football jersey. That's Jack. And the second child is the one 2 in from the right at the bottom. That's Ava. So I'll talk about those 2 in a moment. Ava. When I first met Ava, she was about 6 months old, a little bit more than that. She'd almost died, and her parents didn't know what to do. She was getting great help, and she'd overcome, after some operations, a neuroblastoma, which is a hard tumour in her chest that was crushing her heart and her ribs. She'd overcome that, but she was not doing too well. And what the doctors had said to me was that there's only one real hope for Ava, and that is that they wanted to trial a drug. And going back 10 years, these trials that we have in Australia now weren't happening. There were no trials, and they said, well, we need to manufacture a drug, we need to do this, and I just said, how much? And what are the chances? And they said the chances were very high, but the drug they wanted to develop was previously used to treat sleeping sickness. So there was no proof that this was going to work. But I looked at little Ava, and I spoke to her father and her mother, Tony and Jenny, and I said, we'll see what we can do. What we did is we got that drug manufactured and got it into Ava, and Ava not only survived, but she thrived. And Ava, as you can see, a slightly older child there, she became a star working with us. And the treatment that we developed of that drug is now a standard of care all over the world. So that was a good thing. I reconnected with Ava in 2017, and at that stage she was just having a birthday, and I said to her parents, can Ava come to America with me and my wife and a few friends? We're going to a Lions conference, which is the 100-year anniversary of Lions, and I want Ava to be a keynote speaker at that conference. You can see in the top picture on the left is a picture of Ban Ki-moon, who was the former head of the UN. He handed the microphone to Ava. Ava spoke brilliantly, and in that audience that day there were 28,000 Lions who heard the message of hope and joy and leadership that Ava had given, and Ava's family. You'll see Ava being interviewed for a TV show over on the right-hand side at the top there with her father, Tony. Tony travelled with me on that particular day up to the conference centre in a bus. And I was just talking about Ava's, miraculous survival and so forth. And Tony had never been told how it came about. So I told him that we'd funded the $500,000 to give Ava a chance at life. And he just broke down in tears, and he was so grateful. That it was touching, and a moment I'll never forget. But Ava did a great job at launching an initiative to do genome sequencing of 400 children around the world, not around the world, in Australia. And Ava became a bit of a poster girl for that program. That program has gone on to save many, many lives. What Ava also did on that day and subsequently was helped Lions realise that in its quest for changing the world that it has, they have many things: diabetes, environment, hunger. Vision had been a big program for Lions. We got to add childhood cancer to be one of the 5 humanitarian causes of Lions, which is a cause Lions pursues now in over 200 countries around the world. So in terms of is the job finished? No, but that little ripple that we started many years ago with Ava blossomed into a program now where Lions is pursuing improving childhood cancer survival all over the world. The next quick story I'll share with you is about Jack. The first picture was when Jack was in hospital when he first got a brain cancer. I went and saw Jack. I've known Jack since the day Jack was born. I've known his father for 25 years. And his father rang me when Jack was first diagnosed with a brain cancer. He was in tears. They were in hospital and he couldn't even get a bed. I helped with that, but more importantly, I just gave support at that stage to Alex. And the unfortunate thing was, some 3 or 4 years later, the brain tumour came back. Alex rang me again. Jack was in hospital. He'd lost sight in one of his eyes, was losing sight in the other, and he would have died within 7 or 8 days, was the prediction. When I found out exactly where things were up to, I talked to Alex, and I'd become aware of a particular drug that had been approved that week in Sydney, in Australia. And I rang people to try and get access to that drug for Jack. There was a case in America where a child had been given this particular drug, and it was now available here. The doctors wouldn't prescribe it for Jack. So what I did was I rang Jack's doctor. He wouldn't do it. I rang Jack's doctor's boss, who I'd been funding through my philanthropic work, research for 20 odd years, and not so proud of the language I used, but I basically said, if you don't get that drug for Jack, I'll never support you again. And neither will any organisation I'm associated with. Well, what happened was Jack got the drug. Jack got his sight back within 7 days. Within about 3 weeks, Jack was out of hospital and going fishing with his dad and his grandfather. The story with Jack isn't finished, but I've included a very personal thank you that I received on the right-hand side, which is a little trophy that Jack's parents gave me. And for those who can't read it, it says, "Dear Joe Collins, thank you for saving my life. Love, Jack Burai." A very special moment. Lessons learnt. In thinking about this today, I want to just leave you some lessons that I've learned. Half an hour is not a long time to talk about something as important as changing the world, but it starts with small things. And the thing I remember from my growing up was what my mother said to me, and that's me on the left-hand side. It's a little tyke, and I was probably about 4 years old there. And what I'll never forget is she said, "Do the best you can with what you've got." I think she knew that I was a bit of an underachiever in my early life, and she wanted me to try a bit harder. But around about 2016, I was asked to talk about what I would say to my son. And I hadn't thought about it, but I did. And they're the 5 things that I wrote down as, and I'd encourage you all to think about this, because, putting limits on yourself and on others around you, there's no reason to do that. Don't put limits on yourself. You'll find that if you're passionate, and it doesn't have to be about anything in particular, as long as it's something, you'll bring people with you. And remember those those 3 A's. If you're passionate and you believe in something, then you can achieve it. Really important that you do something for others in life. Mother Teresa, I've talked about what and we all know her story. Do something for others. It's not about yourselves. And you do have the capacity to do something for others. One thing I mentioned Socrates earlier. 400 years ago, the Greek philosophers realized that if somebody has a right, and I've mentioned that I believe children have a right to a healthy life, somebody has an obligation to fulfill that right. And that has stayed with me for a long time. So 400 years ago, Socrates got it right. And he said, do something for others. Change, it's okay. Don't be scared of change. Change is a good thing. And oftentimes, and I said this to my son, be prepared to change. You might find that you're a hell of a lot happier by doing it. And last but not least, I went back to what Mum said, and I said, do the best you can with what you've got. I'm going to conclude now with, this is a project, Donors Without Borders, that I got involved with about 2009. It took 2 years to write. I went along to the Macquarie Graduate School of Management, and I explained to them that donors and the philanthropists didn't know how to talk to each other. We were missing out on opportunities, and I wanted to develop something which would help everybody understand what the childhood cancer landscape was all about, and how to talk to each other. So we did 2 years of work. We wrote a substantial piece of work, and the conclusions of that work were all about the lessons of educating, collaborating, and donating. And I won't spoil it by saying anything more about it, but what I will do is show you a little video which I think summarizes everything I've tried to get across to you today. And I hope you enjoy this little video and take the lessons from it that I hope you do about educating and donating.
Children have active imaginations. They love to be the superhero that defeats the enemy and saves the day. But every 3 minutes, somewhere in the world, a child comes up against a very real enemy in cancer. Survival rates have greatly increased over the past 50 years, but cancer is still the leading cause of death by disease for children. 1 in 5 children will not survive, and 3 out of the 5 survivors will develop side effects that dramatically affect their quality of life. Fortunately, childhood cancer only makes up 1% of all cancers, which is great unless you're that 1%. As a result, there isn't a lot of targeted funding for childhood cancer. This means children are typically treated with drugs developed for adults. The toxicity of the treatments cause children to have bad side effects, and they often develop other cancers, or have long-term side effects like learning disabilities, hearing and memory loss, and issues with their hearts, lungs, and bones. Childhood cancer doesn't just impact the child, but their entire families as well. As home life is disrupted, families are often split during treatments, and there's an increased financial burden. Developing better treatments and finding cures requires research that is both complex and expensive, as the development of a new therapy can take 15 years. While there are numerous cancer charities and researchers doing great work, better coordination between them can mean better research for better treatments and faster cures for children with cancer. But what if there was a plan to kill childhood cancer? What if all the childhood cancer groups could come together to find a cure? This would mean we could invest to accelerate special treatments for children that minimize impact, improve the quality of their life, and ultimately find cures. Investing in research today can create a bright future for kids with cancer. To make this a reality, there are 3 things that we can do. 1. Educate. Get informed about childhood cancer and spread the word. Begin discussions at all levels and sectors across the globe so that we can create a ripple effect of meaningful conversations that can lead to mobilizing forces and turn these conversations into real action. 2. Collaborate. Across all borders. Work together and encourage others to work together too. Fund collaborative projects that transcend all borders. Fund across foundations, researchers, governments, and academia. Do it across cancers, fields of science across the country and across the globe. Become a donor without borders. 3. Donate. Give to institutions that conduct world-class research that will bring us closer to finding a cure. And also, fund the young, brilliant minds in blue sky thinking that just may find the answers that lead to cures. It is our ability to coordinate our efforts that will make the most of the passionate work being done in childhood cancer research. By focusing on these 3 key areas, we can create a better life for children with cancer, and ultimately the breakthroughs that will lead to the cures and eliminate cancers once and for all. Key to making this a reality is changing how we think about how we tackle the problem. Because when you help a child across the table, you're helping a child across the country and across the globe. Finding cures for childhood cancer isn't child's play. And while it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a global village to save a child with cancer.
Thank you for your talk today. It was truly inspirational. Hugely appreciate you sharing your experience with us, not only your personal story, but also Jack and Ava's. And I think that those personal stories are wonderful because it brings giving to life and makes us think about it in a very real way, that we can all, own our own power. And I guess I'll just go back to the beginning of your presentation where you said, believe in your heart of hearts. It's no one else's job to change the world, and we all have the power. So I'm going to remind everyone of that. So much of what you've said today is common sense, but so many of us probably could do so much more when it comes to our own personal giving. So thank you very much for talking with us today. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Jo.